right, as we discussed in the previous video, there are three different control structures in Python. We have sequential control, we have selection or conditionals, and then we have iterative control or loops. We talked about selection control in this video. I'm going to show you like a couple more examples of them. And then in the future videos, we are going to get into iterative design. So just a quick recap. With conditionals, you need to have an if keyword. So you have your if, and then you set your conditions. So it could be one condition or multiple conditions, depending on what problem you have. And then what you're basically doing is you're saying, okay, I have the sequential control overall. And then when I get to this if, I can have multiple options and I can decide which one of these paths I want to take. So you take only one of them and you skip the rest. So depending on which condition and where it is correct, you're going to pick the statements from that condition, go through them, execute them, and then skip everything else inside that if block. So the way that we set it up, the simplest form is just having if without an else. The second simplest one is having an if with its conditions, the statements, and then an else, which means basically that condition, if it's true, do the statements. If not anything else, any other possibility, you go to the else part. And then if you want to have more than two options, more than two paths, then you do one of the multi-way selections. So you can use elif statements, or you can do nested if else. So either one is going to work. They are equally the same. It depends which one you prefer or which one looks better in your program. All right, so now let's get into some examples. So the first example we are going to do is you are going to write a Python program in which the user enters either A, B, or C. If user puts A, then the program should display the word apple. If it's B, you display banana. If it's C, you display coconut. So we are going to go with that. So the first thing we are going to do, as it says, is you're going to get an input from user. So that is the first thing I'm going to set up. So I'm going to get an input from my user. So I'm going to call it user input. And I'm going to say, okay, what is the input? So I'm going to use the function input to get a value from the user. And then we know in the parentheses for that input, we can have a message for our user to let them know what they can put or what they should put in as an input for us. So I'm going to enter a message here saying, please enter, and I'm going to say A, B, or C. Okay, so we have that. And as you see, I'm using quotation inside my string. The reason I can use a quotation is because I'm using, so if you have a different type of quotations for the main one, you can use the other one as a character inside it. So I'm using matching double quotations as for my main string. So for the inner ones, you can use the single quotation. If I had single quotations, it would have faced challenges because then it would have seen this one as a closing for the first one that you started. So if you use the single quotation, then all of the inner ones must be double quotations. And if you fix all of that, it's going to work fine. Okay, so let's test this part of the code, and then we are going to move on into setting our if-else conditionals. Okay, so let's run this one, make sure our input works. So the message shows up, please enter A, B, or C, and let's do B. Nothing is going to happen at this point. We are just testing the input that we received from the user. Okay, I'm going to go back to the previous one. I like it to be shorter. So I go with the double quotations for my main one and then single quotations for the messages that I have. Okay, so that works, all good. So now I'm going to think about how I'm going to set up my conditionals. So our conditional is going to be sensitive into these letters. So we are going to set our condition to compare our user input with any of those characters. So if it's A, we want to do something. If it's B, we want to do something. If it's C, we want to do something. So we are going to set that up, and I'm going to start with A. You can start with any of them. The order doesn't matter in this case. So I'm going to start with A. So if this user input is, we are going to compare them. We are going to look for equality. We want to see if the user input is exactly A. If it's A, then I want to print apple. If it's anything else, I don't want to print apple. So I'm looking for equality. That is why I'm using double equal sign to look for to see if they're equal to each other, if they are exactly the same thing. So one common problem students have is they put A here, and then they say print, and then we are printing apple. All right? So far it looks fine, but if you run it, you're going to see an error message that pops up. So as soon as let's put A here, it's going to give me that error message. Let's read the error message. The error happened in this line, which is line 12, and it's telling you there's a name error. It's looking for this variable A, but the name A is not defined. So let's go back to that line. So I'm going to put the line numbers. So in line 12, it's saying there's something wrong with this A. So it says this A is not defined. And it is right. It's looking for this variable A, but what we wanted to put there was a string A. We want to see if user input is equal to string A, to this character A. If you put A, it looks for a variable, things that you created this variable A, or you wanted to create this variable A, but you cannot find it here because we never did that in our code. The only variable we created in this one is user input. A does not exist. But what we wanted was to compare this user input with this character A. So if you want to have character A, you need to make sure you put it inside quotations to make a string, and then you can do that comparison. And we know input function gives us a string type, so you can simply compare two strings with each other. If they're equal each other, you print the apple that you want. If they're not equal each other, you're going to skip that. You're going to move on to the next line in your code. Okay, so let's run this one more time, test it, and see if we fix that error message. So I'm going to put A now, and you see apple is printed. So it compared user input with character A, and they were equal. It printed apple for us. So next, I'm going to just run it and put anything else. I'm putting B, and nothing is printed because B is not equal to character A. It skips that. All right, now I have that. I'm going to move on and set the next condition in my program. So I'm going to start from the same line as I have my if, because they're all going to be a same block. Since I have three different things to compare, that means I need to have three different conditions, all right? So one for A, one for B, and one for C. So that means I need to have multi-way selection because I have more than two options. So I have three in this example, and later we're going to add the fourth one. So since I have more than two, I'm going to either use elif or use nested if-else. I'm going to start with elif, and then we are going to switch to the other one. For the next example, we are going to start with if-else and then go back to elif. Okay, so here to use the elif, we are going to start with our keyword elif, and then we are going to set our conditions. So user input is going to be equal to B, and then if that's the case, we are going to print the word that we want, so which is banana. Okay, so we have that, and we can test it, make sure it works, and then if it works, we move on to the next one. All right, and you can test it more, still put the A and then put C, and see it skips all of the conditions. So for the C, very similar to the previous one. So we are going to do elif, and user input. And if that is equal to C, we are going to print coconut. Okay, so now we are going to test it. So we are putting A, we get apple. We are going to run it again and put B is going to give us banana. We are going to run it again and put C, and it should give us coconut. And then if I run it again and put anything else, it is going to skip all of those conditions. So it's not going to go through all of the conditions that we had evaluated to false. So it's not going to execute any of the lines that you have, any of the statements that you had inside your if statements. Okay, so one thing that we can add here is, let's say user doesn't put A, B, or C. So we can add an else here and say, okay, if user puts anything else, I want to say print invalid input, which is not in the question, but we can always add that. So if it's not A, B, or C, we are going to get invalid input. So now if I put anything else, I'm going to get that statement. So anything else is going to jump into the else part, and you're going to get that invalid input. So you're giving your user more information about, okay, there's something wrong, you didn't put the right input. All right. So that is one thing to add to this question. The other thing that we can add to this question is taking care of lower and uppercase letters. So what if user puts lowercase a? Should we print apple or not? Let's say we want to just consider A as the thing that we want as a correct or valid input for apple, B correct and valid input for banana, and C in general as a correct input for or correct value for coconut. So if it's uppercase or lowercase, we are going to print the appropriate string for the user. So how can we do that? One way of doing it is, okay, let's say I want to add an additional condition here and say elif, and then I'm going to do lowercase a, and that way is going to take care of that for me. So if I run it and I put lowercase a, is going to print apple. If I put uppercase a, still going to work fine, it's going to print apple. It's going to work for the other ones. So you can add that to all of the other ones, so add one for B. But as you see, the statements for the statement that I have for these two conditions are exactly the same. So why not combine the conditions instead? So if you have two individual conditions with the same exact statements, you can combine the condition as we discussed briefly in the last video. So I'm going to copy the condition as it is. If you want to have it independently, what condition you're going to have. So always think about that whenever you want to combine condition. If I wanted to have this condition independently, writing an if statement for it, how would I created that condition? So create that and then copy it. And here we are going to say if user input is A or if it's lowercase a. So you're basically looking for either one of them. That is why we are using or. So if either one of them is true, we're good. We are going to print apple. So if I do that, then I don't need this statement. So it's going to look for A or lowercase a. And again, the conditions must be independent of each other, like if you wanted to create a whole new if statement. So always think about it that way. So if I run it now, it should work exactly the same as before with no exception. So it works fine, and then you can add that to the other conditions. So I'm going to just copy this one, put it here, and then just change the string to B, and then change this string to C. So if you run it, it should work for the other letters too. So here's banana. If I run it, it should work for lowercase or uppercase C as well. So run it as many times as you want to make sure it works. So this is one way of doing it. There are other ways that you can set this simple condition, and make it work. So one other way was like the first one that I showed you. You can have separate if, elif statements for each one of these conditions, which in my opinion is not necessary when you can combine the conditions. Or you can have it this way. So you have two separate conditions and then you separate them by an or. One common mistake that students do when they combine conditions like this is they omit this part. They take this one out and say, okay, user input, if user input is uppercase A or A. Python won't recognize that you're comparing this one with user input. It just sees a character A, all right? And if I run this code, this always going to give you an apple. So if I put A is apple. If I run it again and I put anything else, if I put K, which is an invalid, it still gives me apple. Why that happened? That goes back to the video that I made for Boolean variables. If you remember, in Boolean variables, every single value that we have has a Boolean representation. So the Boolean value for this character A, so if I say, what is the Boolean representation of this character A, is this true? So what you're saying here is evaluate this one, whatever it is. We won't care, like if it's A or not. Let's say it is false, it's not uppercase A. This one is always going to evaluate to true because the Boolean value for character A is always true. So you're saying false or true, this statement is always true. So you never get into the other conditions to compare them. You're always going to print apple. So be very careful. You don't want to leave a condition like this, which always evaluates to true. So make sure you always have a reference to whatever you want to do the comparison against. And always think about what would I put if I wanted to have an independent condition, right? If I wanted to have like a separate if statement, what condition I put in there. And if you think about it that way, you never go wrong combining different conditions. Okay, so this is another way of doing it. There are other ways that you can do this condition. So the other way is, okay, I want to use membership operator. So I want to see if this user input, which is a character that is coming from input function from user, is in this list, which I can have list whatever values I want. So we are looking to see if this character is a member of this list or a tuple. So it could be any of the sequences that you want to have. Just keep it simple. Or you can have just a simple string. So I can have A, and it looks for membership in that. So if you test it on the shell, you can see it works. So is A in A? It is part of it, so it gives you true. If you want to see if C is part of A, it's going to give you false because C is not part of it. So you can use things like this to set up your condition. So whatever way that you pick is going to, as long as you logically think about it and have the right condition, is going to work the way that you want. There's another way to also set this up, and that is by using a method that I didn't talk about yet. I'm going to just briefly talk about it now. But there are some videos I'm going to make that specifically talk about those type of methods. This method is called, we have two of them that work very similarly. One is upper, one is lower. So if you pass any character to this function upper, which is a method. So actually, let's go ahead and create a variable. So let's say I have this a string, and that is some uppercase, some lowercase characters in it, all right? So if I say, I want you to convert all of the characters in this string to either uppercase, so I have this method, the name of method, with parentheses, going to convert everything to uppercase. Or if I want to convert all of the characters to lowercase, going to convert everything to lowercase for you. So it works that way for you. And it makes the stuff like this easy. So here I'm going to say, okay, whatever this user input is, I want you to convert it to lowercase. So even if it's uppercase, convert it to lowercase, and then compare it with this lowercase a. So that way you're ensuring the value that you're comparing is also a lowercase. So if it was lowercase a, okay, cool, it is lowercase already. If it's uppercase, going to convert it to a lowercase first, and then it's going to compare it to this character a. And then you can do that. So if you run it, if I put uppercase a, it's still going to give me apple because it converts that to lowercase a first and then compare it to this character. So as you see, there are multiple ways of doing the exact same thing. Okay, so that was one example of creating and going from creating your selection and picking what path you want depending on user input. As I promised, I'm going to convert this one to if-else. I would like to keep them all the same. So I'm going to go back to this method. So I'm going to just change this one to uppercase A and A. All of the methods that I talked about are equally same. They all give you the output that you want. So pick your method of solving it, but practice with all of them. In some problems, it's easier to use one over the other ones. Okay, so now I'm going to set up going from elif to nested if-else. So with that, if you remember, I said, okay, so keep your condition, keep your if, and I'm going to change my elif to an else and if. So I'm going to break it to an else, and then I'm going to have an if. So I'm going to say, this is my else. I'm going to press enter. So this is my if, and I'm going to copy everything else and tab, all right? Then next elif, I'm going to make it an else, colon, enter, select everything else, tab. And that's it. We don't have any other elif, so that is going to be nested if else that we have. This is the first one. This is second, so you're nesting another if else inside the first one, and then you're nesting another if else inside the inner else. Okay, so you can go as many times as you want depending on the question. In the next video, we are going to do another example on conditional.